Okay, so an official welcome to everybody to our webinar on Ukuthwala, and it's described as bride kidnapping. So my name is Anissa. I'm the National Coordinator of the National Shelter Movement of South Africa. For those of you who joined us for the first time, it's an important activity of the NSM to engage with community members and stakeholders throughout the year through our online monthly webinars. We've covered a good range of topics, relevant topics surrounding gender-based violence. And one of them particularly related to this one here is what we call the Blesser Blessy, a webinar that we did some months ago, or transactional sexual relationships. And so, for a while, we've been wanting to do a webinar on Ukuthwala, and bring in the influence of some negative cultural practices that have a direct link with the prevalence of gender-based violence. I want, on that note, to thank Ms. Gayan Devi. I'm going to introduce her now. She's going to take us through a very interesting presentation. It's very detailed. For those of you who have had a look at the overview, so we should have a much better understanding of what it entails, the implications by the end of the session. Before I hand over to Ms. Dwarika, I'm going to introduce you. I see that Ms. Gayan is a social worker by profession. She's worked a lot in child welfare and child protection, was a manager with child welfare for a period of 22 years, which is a very, very long time. Also the leader of social welfare service practitioners in 2003 in Chicago. That must have been quite an interesting experience. Ms. Dwarika, maybe we can chat about that sometime. Also, I see employed with the South African Police Service in police social work services, another area that we struggle with, I must say, when it comes to gender-based violence. Also Deputy Director, the Department of Social Development within the Child Protection Directorate, focusing on child exploitation, and content expert on child exploitation, trafficking, child labor, commercial sexual exploitation of children, and cyber crime of children. So a lot of experience, a lot of insight, a lot of difficult areas that we deal with and I'm sure you've seen a lot of that. But today, we are privileged to have you, Ms. Dwarika, to share your insight on Ukuthwala. So without any delay, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Musa. Good morning, colleagues. It is a pleasure to actually have this discussion. I think it's something that we all face on a daily basis in our work environment, but we need to understand the practice itself and what are our responsibilities. So, as indicated, I'm Gyan Dwarika from the National Department of Social Development, and the sad part is I'm a retiree, but I'm on contract with the department, which will end very shortly. So if you want to utilize me for anything else, please do so before the end of the year. Can I just switch my camera on for a short while and then switch off again? Is it okay with you?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to switch off now. Let me move with my present. Why is it stuck now? Let's see if I can move it now. My presentation is stuck. Sorry, colleagues. These are the technical challenges we have. Okay, introduction. I just want to emphasize that when we look at the customs and the practice of Ukuthwala, there's something on my screen that's blocking me. I need to remove it. It's all the names that are popping up, colleagues. Let me just remove this. So I can't see my presentation. Oh my word. Is my presentation still being shared?
Yes, it
Yes,
is.
it
Yes,
is.
Gayan, it's quite clear. I don't know if anybody else is having difficulty, but from our side, it looks good.
Okay, let me just close this and then we can go back to it. Mm-mm. You see, these are the technical challenges you have when because I'm working out of the office and then it becomes a problem, especially with connectivity. I'm actually in another meeting with the African Union in Cape Town, so I excused myself from that to actually be part of this now. Let me get going with my. Colleagues, my slides are not moving. Just give me a few seconds. I'll just fix that and then we can continue.
Dan, would you like to maybe close the presentation completely and try reopening it?
I'm going to do that. Is it showing now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. But as I said, there's okay, now I've got it sorted. Okay. I'm going on to introduction. The custom and the practice of Ukuthwala are an initiative and a response to the challenges and threats that are directed towards this practice. So when we look at the practice itself, remember there is a practice in place for persons over the age of 18. And when we are looking at children, where they use the concept of Ukuthwala on children, that becomes a malpractice. There are some elements of gender-based violence that are associated with Ukuthwala. Consent to the practice of Ukuthwala has always remained rooted in the practice of Ukayawala. And in that said, the interpersonal relationships of said families and of communities where this practice exists. An area of concern is the malpractice of Ukuthwala when children are used in the guise of child marriages or consensual partnerships or relationships. And we all know the definition of a child outlines any person under the age of 18. And this is mentioned categorically in the Children's Act, in the Sexual Offences Act, in the Trafficking in Persons Act. So when we look at children, we always identify them as persons under the age of 18. So we ask ourselves, can children get married? You know, when we ask this, are they prepared for marriage itself, the whole concept of marriage, and the responsibilities that go with it? Remember, when a child is married, we as adults, when we get married, we are not even prepared for marriage responsibilities. For one, it's the interpersonal relationship between the man and the woman or whomever the partner is. It's also the responsibility of caring for the family, the responsibility of household chores, financial responsibilities. So when we look at that, do we understand how does a child conceptualize these responsibilities? Because sometimes even adults can't conceptualize that. You're also dealing with different personalities, different scenarios, different cultural beliefs, different environments. So we must constantly, as social service practitioners, ask ourselves, are children prepared for marriage and the responsibilities thereof? So a little bit of background. The Department of Social Development is a custodian of all children in South Africa, including non-South African children, and it aligns services to Section 28 of the Constitution of South Africa and provisions of the Children's Act, which is a key piece of legislation in identifying a child in need of care and protection. If a child's right is violated, as well as the responsibility of providing care and protection and the safety to a child. So whenever we talk about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, we need to understand what are the rights of children. It's very sad in training sessions when you raise the question of what are the responsibilities of children. And as social service practitioners, you get a very skewed version of what are the rights of children. And here it makes you wonder if you, as a social service practitioner, do not understand every right of a child, you're never going to understand how is a child violated. And in jest, I know I always tease social workers, you only know Section 150. And please, colleagues, go and read different pieces of legislation, which gives you an overview of how children should be cared for. I know the Children's Act is our Bible and that we should follow whatever provisions are there. But there are times when social service practitioners don't know other aspects of the Children's Act. Okay, South Africa was accepted as a pathfinder country to the global movement to end violence against children on the 12th of December 2019. Now here South Africa has to implement the Inspire strategy and the elements of the Inspire strategy. Together with that, we need to also look at what are our responsibilities in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a list of Sustainable Development Goals, and how do we implement our services aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals? Who becomes responsible for that? Remember, I always say this, that a social service practitioner must not feel that I'm just working in an NGO sector and my work is just to report to that particular organization. No, South Africa is always reporting to the United Nations on the progress made, for example, on the implementation of the Children's Act, the implementation of the TIP Act, the implementation of the Sexual Offences Act. When you are in practice, you are actually implementing provisions of those acts. So it's important for you to understand that your work, wherever you are, in whichever corner of South Africa you are, it's very, very important. So your reporting is also critical in terms of us knowing the number of children you have reached, what was the purpose of reaching those children, what did you do in order to improve that child's life and to attain the well-being of that child. This places responsibilities on government departments and non-governmental organizations to ensure programs and strategies are in place for the care and protection of all children against any form of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. If we had to look at the problem statement, the abuse of children and women in the name of Ukuthwala is an unacceptable development which requires the intervention of government and civil society. Girls as young as 12 years old are abducted and forcibly married to older men. In addition, women and children, specifically the girls, are generally vulnerable to sexual and domestic violence and the resultant problems of maintenance after they fall pregnant. So sometimes this marriage doesn't work out, or the child decides she wants to leave this relationship, and then she has children, and then there's problems in terms of maintenance of those children. The fact that minor girls are forced into relationships with older men places enormous mental and physical stress on them. These circumstances may lead to emotional problems and the likelihood of maladjustment, along with physical problems associated with early motherhood. The fact that they are abducted at an early age, when their bodies have not yet fully developed, leaves them susceptible to various health risks, among others, cervical cancer and other complications associated with the reproductive system. They would also be vulnerable to sexually transmitted infection, inclusive of HIV/AIDS. The violation of the right of the child through the practice of child marriages must be stopped or abolished to ensure that the custom reverts to the historical respected one for consummating customary marriages among adults. So if we look at the definition, child marriage is a marriage or union in which one or both spouses are under 18 years old. It can be a formal marriage or an informal union where a couple live together without a civil or religious ceremony. Child marriage is a violation of human rights and can have negative consequences for the health, education, and well-being of the child. Ukuthwala translates to bride kidnapping in English. It refers to a traditional practice in South Africa where a man abducts a young girl with the intention of forcing her into marriage, often without the consent of her family. This practice is primarily observed in rural communities and is rooted in cultural customs. Colleagues, please stop me and ask questions if you want clarity on certain issues. Please do that. The rationale of Ukuthwala in terms of the custom, the main aim is to force the family of the girl to enter into marriage negotiations and give consent for the marriage to take place, to hasten matters if the woman is already pregnant, to persuade the woman of the seriousness of the intent to marry her, to avoid the payment of immediate lobola when the prospective groom's family cannot afford lobola at that moment. Where it happens with the girl's prior knowledge, she is then expressing her right to consent. And then we need to look at the impact for Ukuthwala on a girl child. And we all know there's a health impact because there's an intimate relations, there's sexual exposure between both of them. Experiences of, oopsie, again, here I go off again. Is it sharing, colleagues?
Yes, it is.
Why am I, on my side, it's gone off. No. Let me
We
try
have
again.
we have a hand raised. Maybe if we can hear Catherine while you're trying to sort that out.
Okay, perfect. Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Question about consent, because consent, like a 14-year-old can't consent.
Sorry, before you go on, please introduce yourself, then I know who I'm talking to.
Sorry. So I'm Catherine. I work with the National Freedom Network. So
Oh, okay.
then. So I was just wondering that, to maybe explain consent, because I know a 14-year-old can't consent to having a relationship with an 18-year-old, for example. So how does that work within the Ukuthwala principle?
Yeah, so this is talking to basically an adult, a person over 18 years, where it happens that the girl's prior knowledge, she is then expressing her right to consent to that marriage, but it's not talking to anybody under the age of 18. A child cannot give consent to a marriage. A child cannot give consent to sexual interactions. So, well, in terms of the Sexual Offences Act, when we look at the age of consent, that has a different focus and a different purpose. But when it comes to Ukuthwala, a child cannot give her consent. I hope I've answered you, Catherine.
So, sorry, can I just come in there? So then just for purposes of clarity, then that is an illegal practice, obviously.
Yes, as I said, the practice of Ukuthwala on children is a malpractice. Okay, irrespective of whether parents agree to it or not, there are cases in the Eastern Cape where parents and grandparents have been charged for actually initiating the practice of Ukuthwala with their children. So there were cases that was reported to the SAPS and they have been dealt with accordingly. Catherine, are we okay? And
Great.
Anissa?
On my side, yes. Catherine, I see we have another hand.
Good, yeah.
Vanessa. Gaia, do you want to take that one, or can we have Gaia come in? Vanessa?
Hi, Kian. Hi, colleagues. Is it okay if I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Hi, Gian. Just for the good morning to you. Thank you so much for this very informative presentation. Just for to see clarity, with regards to Ukuthwala, we know there's a kidnapping and then there's negotiations that go with the bride, inverted commas, bride family, and then there's money exchange. Will this not also be prosecuted under the TIP Act?
Yes, it would. I am coming to that part when we come to legislation to
Okay,
actually
thank you.
indicate to you, yeah,
Thank you.
how does it actually link with, yeah, but remember, Ukuthwala is a practice that where a young man and a young female then engage in a relationship, but then the issue of kidnapping only comes when it's the issue with children. There are issues of kidnapping with persons over the age of 18, but the person has to prove that they were kidnapped. And then remember, kidnapping has its own specific definition. So people confuse the issue of abduction, kidnapping, those kind of aspects. So when the police is taking a statement, they need to understand if you are saying it's a child, it's kidnapping, these are the elements that will follow in terms of the definition of kidnapping and what was the purpose of kidnapping. At most times, it's not necessarily for financial gain. It's sometimes, like in this particular case, kidnapping for sexual exploitation, kidnapping for the purposes of marriage. But with adult females, the element of kidnapping is a very controversial issue because generally it's the relationship between the male and the female that then leads to the issue of Ukuthwala, where the boy will then take her to his family and then there's negotiations between the both families. But as I said, it's a completely different practice when it's children. I hope I've clarified that with you.
Thank you so much. It's clarified. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, as I said, with health impact, we all know experiences of complications such as HIV, AIDS, and other related diseases, which I just discussed now. Then sexual reproductive rights. Sexual relations with the child increases the likelihood of HIV infections and other sexually transmitted diseases, and it affects her sexual and reproductive health rights negatively. Because remember, as we all know, that the child is not ready for that kind of activity. And the body also, in terms of health, the body is not ready to have that activity. Okay, childbearing, this may entail complications during pregnancy and delivery, and a great risk of mother dying from these complications. And then education, dropping out of school, and then the child ultimately having low literacy levels. Gender equality, continuous gender inequality between girls and boys, and lessens chances of a better future. And then it's a lost childhood. It can also have immediate and long-term harmful effects on a girl's emotional, psychological welfare since she's forced to become a wife or a mother while she is still a child. As I indicated in my opening statement, the responsibilities that a child has to then take on. Then the legislative mandates. The Republic of South Africa has legislation that regulates marriage processes. Remember, South Africa is a signatory of international law with respect children to marriage rights. It is forced marriage. These are the definitions, including abduction for marriage and child marriage. It is a form of harmful traditional practice. This is considered to be a form of violence against children, women and children, constituting gender-based discrimination and a violation of their human rights. The right of a woman to choose when, who, and whether to marry is protected by a number of international human rights instruments, including those to which South Africa has either acceded or ratified. Then we look at international conventions Article 16.2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights declares that marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. Now, remember, this is addressing adults, any person over 18. Article 1 of the Convention of the Consent to Marriages, minimum age for marriage, and the registration of marriages prohibits marriages that are entered into without the full and free consent of both parties and requires that such consent should be expressed by the prospective spouses in person. The convention obliges state parties to take legislative action to specify a minimum age for marriage. So when we look at this convention, it'll be the Department of Home Affairs who would have ratified that particular convention because they focus on the marriages issue. So the Convention on the Rights of the Child requires state parties to take all effective and appropriate measures with the view to abolishing traditional practices prejudicial to the health of children. The Committee on the Rights of the Child urges 19 state parties to develop and implement legislation aimed at changing and prevailing attitudes and address gender roles and stereotypes that contribute to harmful traditional practices to protect adolescents from all harmful traditional practices such as early marriage. State parties, which is us, South Africa, are also urged to increase the minimum age for marriage with or without consent to 18 years for both girls and boys. Okay, then we will look at it in the African continent, the following instructions are particularly important. The African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child obliges all state parties to take all appropriate measures to eliminate harmful social and cultural practices affecting the welfare, dignity, normal growth, and development of the child, as well as prohibit child marriages through legislation and take action to specify minimum age of marriage to be 18 years. Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on Rights of Women in Africa requires state parties to take all legislative and other measures to eliminate all forms of harmful practices which negatively affect human rights of women. Okay, then we come to the national legislative mandates. Any questions at this point in time? Colleagues? Any questions? I can't see if there's hands or whatever. Please let me know, Anissa. Can I move on?
There's no new hands. I'm not sure Vanessa's hand is still up, but I think
No,
it's
it's a new hand. It's a new hand.
new hand.
Okay.
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 All right,
Yeah,
Vanessa.
yeah, and just give us some clarity because I think there is some gray area about this, and I know what the legislation says, but there is some gray area because of discussions about the marriage bill. So are we conclusive in saying that no person under the age of 18 can give consent to be married, or is it 21?
It's under the age of 18. Remember, it was previously a person was considered no longer a minor at the age of 21. So that has changed, and now we look at a child up to the age of 18. So when the child turns 18, that child then becomes an adult. And that child can consent to his or her own marriage at the age of 18. That child can also marry without the consent of parents and whomever.
Okay,
So
then
it's the age of 18, yes.
So then my follow-up question would be that even customary marriages,
Yeah.
because we know that if you stay with someone for 2 years, it's considered a customary marriage. Will that also apply here?
Yes, there has been amendments to the Customary Marriages Act. So we need to look at the provisions there. What is it saying? Well, actually, all pieces of legislation aligned to the issue, to the Constitution and the Children's Act when it comes to issues of children, that a child is a child up to the age of 18. So even in the Customary Marriages Act, it also covers the aspect of 18. But remember, there are some religious groupings that will actually give consent for their children to marry prior to the age of 18. And that there's a process that has to be followed with the Department of Home Affairs, where the parents give consent for their child's marriage, but there's a criteria that that piece of legislation will outline in terms of how the child can be married, why the child can be married, why the child can't be married. So there's criteria outlined in terms of the child's mental health, physical health, those aspects. So parents can give consent to the child's marriage, proviso those criteria. They meet those criteria.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay.
Guy, I see a hand from Simon, and then also on the chat box, there's a question that goes, is that happening across all cultures in South Africa?
You mean the question is this happening across all cultures in South Africa?
That's a question
The issue
from
of
Nelly
Ukuthwala.
Louise. Yes.
No, there's the issue of Ukuthwala, there's the issue of Shobedisa, but it's different provinces that have different cultural beliefs and they have different requirements for those cultural beliefs. So the Department of COCTA, the Traditional Affairs Unit actually deals with those cultural beliefs, and they will align their inputs to the Children's Act and then into the Marriages Act. So Traditional Affairs has the responsibility to look at all traditional aspects in terms of marriages and other aspects, cultural beliefs. But there are different beliefs. Like I know in Limpopo is the Shobedisa, in Eastern Cape and KZN it's the practice of Ukuthwala. Okay, I hope I'm
Thank you
answering
for
the
that,
question.
Gaia. Now, Louise, you'll just either respond or put on the chat if that's adequate. And then Simon, your question. Simon, go ahead, please. Okay, now Louise is happy. Thank you, now Louise. Simon, do you want to go ahead?
I see more inputs to the chat box that are popping
All
up.
right, yeah. I was struggling to unmute, so I've been able to unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Simon, and where are you from? Which organization?
No, I'm okay. I am from the National Prosecuting Authority working for a Ukuthwala Care Center in the R, Northern Cape.
Okay.
All right. My question is it possible the lady who has been married with Ukuthwala and then can he still be able to lodge a complaint even if he's still in the marriage today?
Yes, Simon. Remember the issue. Remember, if this person is a victim of Ukuthwala, and remember the issue of sexual abuse, that people could report much after that abuse has happened, showing the effects of that abuse on the person, whether the person went through a state of depression. So you are supported with medical reports and whatever. But if a person comes to you now, says at the age of 22, and says, I was a victim of Ukuthwala from the age of 12, you could take this process forward. You could make the application, a charge could be brought against maybe the person who married her or the person who gave her into marriage. So it depends on the SAPS in that community, whether they would be able to activate that charge. And then again, it's on the NPA to make decisions whether they can prosecute this person. I hope I've answered you, Simon.
Yeah, partially I can say, but this person, because I once had a conversation with is a mother now because she's married
Yeah.
and she's having kids, and now, but out of the conversation that I had with her, it's like I could feel that she was not happy according to the way how the arrangements was done, and she had no way to complain. But today she's a matured woman. She is now having the family. Now I'm just checking if she can be able to lodge a complaint now.
Yes, she can.
All right.
Yeah, she can. You take it forward. And I think it's important for you to also talk to Karina Kutsia of NPA, the national office, who's very
Okay.
clued up on the issue of taking cases after the incident has happened. Do you know Karina
All right.
Kutsia?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, then I think send Karina an email and ask her. Then she'll be able to outline in terms of what charges can be brought against the person. Because as you indicate, she's now an adult, but she was a victim of Ukuthwala.
All right. Thank you
Guy,
so
is there
much.
an email address
For
uh, for the lady at the department who we can take up cases like this with, that you can share?
yes, there is. Well, it's Karina Kutsia at NPA, but I will forward you the email address.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay, so can I just refer to the chat box quickly? I see there's a question from Peter who says, what engagement is there with cultural leaders to effect change in this regard?
Okay, you want me to answer each one? Yes, there is a lot of, remember at National Office, we work very closely with other government departments. We work with the traditional leaders. We just had a session in the Eastern Cape about 2 weeks ago with traditional leaders on sexual abuse and the men and boys movement. So there was lots of discussions on the responsibility of men to respect women and to actually look at the dignity of women. So, as I said, 2 weeks ago, we were there and engaging with traditional leaders. In 2 weeks' time, we'll be in Limpopo also engaging with traditional leaders also on the issue of sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. So there's a lot of engagement. There's a lot of, remember when we are developing legislation, that piece of legislation through the development process is forwarded to all government departments. And at the first level, it's forwarded to all government departments for them to provide the necessary inputs. Then subsequently then goes down to the provincial level and then for public consultation on those issues that are being added to any piece of legislation. And at all different levels, we always have the traditional and religious leaders involved in that process. So there's a lot of communication and discussion between ourselves.
Thank you for that. Does that answer your question, Peter? In the meantime, I see
Yes,
we
thank
also have
you.
we have another. Can I go for for another question,
Yes,
Guy?
yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we have Cindy. Cindy Siwe, thank you for the presentation. My question is, how does the department draw a clear line between Ukuthwala as a cultural practice and Ukuthwala as a human rights violation, especially in cases where consent is not freely given? And how do we ensure that communities understand that distinction?
Okay. So if you understand the practice of Ukuthwala, as I indicated, there is a practice that is in existence, but remember, it is for persons over the age of 18. So that practice you cannot touch. So if for any reason the female in that practice is then violated in this process of Ukuthwala. Because remember, the process entails the boy and the girl meeting, then the boy allegedly takes her to his family, then they reach out to the girl's family, and then there's negotiations for lobola and all of that. So if the girl did not give her consent, remember, over 18 she gives her consent. Under 18, there's no issue of consent. Under 18, if the child is under 18, then that child is a child of abuse and exploitation. Then that child must be seen as a child in need of care and protection. So, Sindiswa, I hope I've answered you. That is the fine line. And then how do you inform communities? In your awareness raising programs, I know all different government departments, the NGO sector are always having awareness raising programs. In your awareness raising programs, you could have a targeted topic, maybe talking about marriages, then the issue of child marriages, then the issue of Ukuthwala. And now we have a further insertion in the Marriages Act of where the male could actually assume the surname of the female. And so some people are still not comfortable with that. And so you can have discussions with your community, with children, with parents, and communities in terms of how do they understand these practices, what are the constitutional responsibilities, and where are the reporting mechanisms if they are violated. I hope I've answered you, Sandiswa. Sandiswa?
Sindisewe? Okay, so you'll indicate if you need more clarity. I'm just going to move on to the chat. There's another from Gugulet who says, please share some more about bride children in Limpopo. Is this prevalent there? Which provinces or ethnic groups is more prevalent in South Africa?
Well, as I indicated, is the practice of Shobedisa in the Limpopo province, in KZN and Eastern Cape. It's the practice of Ukuthwala, which then spills over into the Western Cape, because there's lots of movement from the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape, but the practice actually takes place in the Eastern Cape, and the child is taken over to the Western Cape because of employment purposes of the male partner, and the child is then taken as a wife or caregiver to his children, a sexual partner to him. So it's a spillover from the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape, but there are no incidents of Ukuthwala in the Western Cape, but there's a high incidence in Eastern Cape and in KZN.
Thank you so much, Guyan, for engaging with participants on their questions. Thank you, everybody, for asking questions. Just before we go on, I just want to double check with Vanessa. Vanessa, is that a new hand?
This is a new hand.
Okay, Vanessa.
Ian, I just want to pick your brain a little bit because I know you speaking in the context of children. You mentioned that somebody that's over 18, if they are taken against their will, does the Sexual Offences Act cover them?
Yes, I'm coming to that in the legislation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Also remember, if they're taken against their will, anybody, even if it's over 18 and they violated, then it's a different focus. Okay, you're dealing with the child in a different piece of you're dealing with the person in a different piece of legislation, like you indicated, the Sexual Offences Act. But if it's a child that is now a victim of Ukuthwala or at risk of being a victim, then that child will be dealt with in terms of the Children's Act as a child in need of care and protection. So you look at the elements that will determine how you see this child as a child in need of care and protection. And that child will be dealt with in terms of the Children's Act. But the the perpetrator will be dealt with in other pieces of legislation. For example, if the child was trafficked, then that perpetrator will be dealt with in terms of the TIP Act, or if there's just sexual exploitation, then in terms of the Sexual Offences Act. I hope I've answered you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Thank you completely. Thank you.
Okay. Can I move on now?
Sure. Thanks, Guyan, for your patience.
Okay. The right to equality, which must be read in conjunction with the promotion of equality and prevention of unfair discrimination act, which prohibits customary practices that impair the dignity of women and undermine the dignity and well-being of girls, and also consider sexual harassment. Now, here is also another issue. Remember, we have the Protection from Harassment Act. If you have strong evidence to say that this child or this adult was harassed and there was sexual harassment, you can actually bring charges against the person in terms of the Protection of Harassment Act, because the Protection of Harassment Act actually outlines what is sexual harassment. So you can then look at the provisions of that act to bring charges against. So you can play around with different pieces of legislation because, and this is where your awareness raising should actually empower people to look at different pieces of legislation. And colleagues, please read. Don't only read Section 150 of the Children's Act. No, 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 no. You're going nowhere. Read other pieces of legislation. And as Vanessa will always say, when you are speaking, please speak from an informed position. You never know who is in your audience that could challenge you on what you are saying. So read up on different issues, understand it. So when you are sharing it with children, parents, and the communities, you know exactly what you are saying. Okay, colleagues? Okay, then the right to human dignity, the right to freedom and security of the person, which includes the right to be free from all forms of violence, because child marriages is also seen as a form of violence against children. Then the right to education, the rights of children, which include the right to be protected from maltreatment, neglect, abuse, and degradation, are not to be required or permitted to perform work or provide services that are inappropriate for a person of that age or place at risk the child's well-being, education, physical or mental health, or spiritual, moral, or social development. I want to challenge everybody in this. Which legislation are we talking about when we are saying not to be required or permitted to perform work or provide services that are inappropriate for a person of that child's age? Do you know what legislation we are talking about? Colleagues? Anybody else? Vanessa said the Labor Act. Somebody said the Labor Relations Act. Anybody else? Anybody? So this is why I'm saying to you, colleagues, read different pieces of legislation. When we are talking about the Bill of Rights, somebody says, no. The Bill of Rights focuses on the rights of children. But when we come to the second part, not to be required or permitted to perform work or provide services that are inappropriate for a person of that child's age. Anissa, there are more social service practitioners here, isn't it? Anissa?
Yes.
Right.
From
somebody is
what I'm
saying-
seeing on the chat, and yes, they are.
Right. Then somebody said now Children's Act. Where in the Children's Act would you find this part? How you have a child that is married? I'm throwing it to everybody. You have a child that is married. Now you are saying the child is performing household chores, the child is not going to work, the child is doing washing, ironing, cooking, cleaning, those kind of things. And you need to protect this child. Where would you look for those provisions in the Children's Act? And what legislation will you cross-reference it with? Colleagues, let's talk. Nobody wants to talk to me now, Anissa.
Sorry, Kyle. Is there anyone who wants to add or even ask? You're more than welcome to engage even in a discussion.
We forgot. Somebody says we forgot. Colleagues, it is in section 141. Please take notes, colleagues. It's in section 141 of the Children's Act, which covers the issue of child labor. This practice can then be considered child labor, where the child, you motivate your report when you're removing this child. You motivate the report because you need to emphasize that this child is a victim of child marriage. This child is also performing these duties, and that becomes child labor. And you take those elements from section 141 of the Children's Act, which is talking to child labor, and add it to your report to strengthen your report. Why you're considering this child as a child in need of care and protection. Now, section 141 of the Children's Act cross-references, oh, shame. Somebody says, I have no idea, ashamed to admit that's why I'm learning from you, oh, shame. Miss Pollock or whomever. Colleagues, as I was saying, section 141 cross-references with section 43.1 and 43.2 in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. There it talks about child work. The Basic Conditions of Employment Act have amended their piece of legislation. They used to call it child labor, but they no longer call it child labor. Now they call it child work. So it cross-references with that in terms of child work, and it also gives you a determination of age. At what age can a child work, the times that a child can work, and also children in performing arts, the ones that are doing advertisements, that are doing things on TV. So children in performing arts, it's called SEPA. They would actually outline exactly how much a time a child can actually work. Does it affect their education? Does it affect their development, their spiritual, moral, social development? So the two pieces of legislation actually cross-reference with each other. In line with that, we have the Convention on the Worst Forms of Child Labor, which is Convention 182, which then talks to children working in environments like working in the chemical industry, like we have in South Africa, in the fishing industry, in the Western Cape. We have a serious problem where children are actually used when the boats bring the fish in, then they scale the fish. They're actually working in ice, standing in ice, where they are losing piece, like flesh is falling off because they do not have protective gear. So these are things that we need to be aware of when we are looking at all these issues. But coming back to the issue of Ukuthwala, how does a child perform work? Is a child cooking, caring for older children, caring for the man's children that may be older than her? Also, performing work, going to the river, washing clothes, cooking, those kind of things. So it's not an easy environment for a child who's a child bride. Okay, colleagues, the Constitution places emphasis that everyone must take into account the child's best interest in every matter involving a child. Okay, and then the Children's Act elaborates that the principle of the best interest of the child entails by providing an example that in matters concerning a child, the child's age, maturity, and stage of development, and the need to protect a child from physical or psychological harm must be taken into account. Section 12 of the Children's Act places emphasis on social, cultural, and religious practices, and that every child has the right not to be subjected to social, cultural, and religious practices which are detrimental to his or her well-being. There's a research company that's actually got colleagues. My battery is dying. I need to excuse myself and go to the conference room again and just pick up my charger. I'll tell you when I'm ready for that. There's a research company that's doing research on virginity testing and the practice of virginity testing and the psychological effects of virginity testing. So, colleagues, I'm not sure any of you were interviewed by this company who's actually doing it for the department. So, as I say, colleagues, just be aware of what's going around in your communities. All of us have access to rural communities and what practices are actually happening in those communities. Anissa, can I take a break for 5 minutes and just get my charger? If it's okay with you, maybe all of you can engage in what we've discussed thus far. Is that okay, Anissa?
Sure. Sure, of course you can.
Okay, thank
Does
you.
everybody need I think it is an intense topic. I think if everyone just wants to get a 5 minute, we can do that.
Okay.
So it's
All right,
11, say
Anissa.
about 11:05, we can.
Kamu nag-leave. Nagkakita na kamu na kay nag-leave ka mo. Man,
Somebody else speaking.
oh, mama nag-leave.
Trying to get
Mm.
something. Go down.
We back?
Okay, yes, we are. You can continue, guys. Thank you.
So have you had discussions, Anissa? Hello?
Guys, we agreed on a 5 minute. We agreed on a 5 minute break.
Yeah. So you
And
didn't
we
have
just
time
got
to have
it.
any discussion. Okay, no, that's fine. All right. So can I move on now? Okay.
Yes, you can. You can.
Okay. The Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, customarily, Ukuthwala is a precursor towards the formation of a customary marriage. It is important that all the steps necessary towards consummation of a valid marriage, a customary marriage, must be complied with as set out in the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. The Act states that the parties to a customary marriage must be above the age of 18 and they must consent to the proposed customary marriage. So we've been covering this in our discussions. Then section 25, my importance is spelled incorrectly. Okay, I'll correct this. Section 25 of the Marriage Act, application ensures the importance that the power of approval given to the parents, guardians, and government officials must be exercised in the best interest of the child. So you see what I was saying to your colleagues, that there's always a cross-reference and an overlap of provisions in all pieces of legislation. Where a minor has entered into a marriage without consent as required by the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, the parent, guardian, or the minor can approach the court for the dissolution of the marriage. Such an application must be made before the minor reaches the age of 18 years and within 6 weeks of the date that the parent becomes aware of the existence of the marriage. Where such an application is made by the minor, it must be made before he or she turns 18 years or within 3 months thereafter. So if a child is a victim of child marriage, the child can actually dissolve that marriage, but must be below the age of 18, and then they give you that latitude of whether it's 3 months thereafter, or what's the other one saying, before she turns, or 6 weeks of the date that the parents become aware of the existence of the marriage. So this is in cases where parents are not aware of the marriage of the child. Okay. Let's move to the next. Then, how does the law protect victims of Ukuthwala? Here, the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, the age of consent for marriage is 18 years, which we've been emphasizing. Then the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act make it punishable to conclude a forced marriage with another person. Ukuthwala, now this is from this particular act now. Ukuthwala is a form of abduction that involves kidnapping a girl or a young woman by a man and his friends or peers with the intention of compelling the girl or the young woman's family to agree into that marriage. So the TIP Act has made provisions for that. Then we have the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act, and this is what it outlines. Rape: if a man has sex with a girl less than 12 years of age, he commits the rape because she is too young to consent. If the man has sex with the girl between 12 and 16 years of age, he is guilty of statutory rape, whether or not she agreed to have sex. If he has sex with a girl over 16 years of age without her consent, he commits rape. Sexual assault: direct or indirect contact between genital organs, anus, woman's breast, or any part of the body used for purposes of penetration or sexual stimulation. Any man who sexually violates an abducted girl is guilty of a sexual assault. Now, remember, previously it was just looking at the penis entering the vagina, but now the Sexual Offences Act has also been amended to actually bring in other aspects in terms of, as indicated here, with the genital organs, anus, using any equipment, using a bottle or those kind of things that will be considered a sexual assault. Sexual exploitation: when a person pays someone under the age of 18 years for sexual services, even if the sexual act is not committed, the parents or caregiver of a child who participates in or allows Ukuthwala, Itombe, or does not report it when their child is abducted in terms of Ukuthwala or Itombe to the police may be charged with the crime of sexual exploitation. But also here, now we find also because of economic situations, parents are also giving their children into marriage in exchange for monies, in exchange for other items for their home, and that is considered sexual exploitation. In 2023, December, there was a program on the border of Mozambique and Pumalanga, Nkomazi area, where young girls, actually it was a person that went to work in the mine there, and he was quite horrified when he was walking the street there were young girls that approached him for sex. Young girls as young as 12-year-old, 10-year-old, in that age bracket that approached him for sex. And then he did his own investigation. And he found that because this was a transit route from South Africa to Mozambique, there were lots of trucks that actually go between the borders there. And he found that these young girls are no longer at school and that they engage in sexual activities with the truck drivers that go to and from South Africa. And when the department actually got involved with other stakeholders, the NPA was also very involved with us, we found that these young girls, because of poverty, their parents actually put them out on the road for sexual exploitation. And it's horrifying to know that these children will actually engage in sexual activities at that age, and then there's teenage pregnancies. But these truck drivers will go to Mozambique and on return will bring a chicken for the family, just one chicken, so that they will have a meal. They were so excited to have a chicken. So these are things that we need to be aware of. Poverty leads to so many other social ills, and sexual exploitation also may be a result of poverty. So this is how it actually pans out, and how children then how parents can also be charged for actually engaging their children in sexual exploitation. Right, government and civil society response. Under the Children's Act, child marriage is a criminal offense, punishable by law. Child marriage is in essence an abuse and exploitation of children. It denies their right to education, to sexual reproductive health, and to a future in which they make their own decisions. Now we talk about Pillar 7 in the National Plan of Action, where children are now having a say in terms of what they want to do, which will be added on to all the 6 pillars that are there. So the Department of Social Development has developed and implemented a number of initiatives in collaboration with key departments and civil society organizations. The programs are targeted at areas where harmful cultural practices such as Ukuthwala are prevalent. The outreach programs are focused on community dialogues with both parents and caregivers and children about children's rights, including protection of children from abuse and exploitation, and reporting of cases of child marriages. So there was a question earlier about how do we empower communities and parents? This is your way you can do it. And also, colleagues, when you're reporting on Form 22, don't just put their sexual abuse. It makes no sense. If the child was sexually exploited or the child is a victim of child marriage, tick the correct box, or when the section where it says other, right there, this child is a victim of child marriage. So it then gives a proper view of the scope of problem in the country. So colleagues, please do that. And then we, as I said, we are able to track and trace data from the Child Protection Register. Okay, then there are also ongoing advocacy programs on gender equality, intersectoral training and capacity building to strengthen the knowledge base of stakeholders in order to prevent and protect children from child marriages and harmful cultural practices. The initiatives are part of the 365 Days Child Protection Campaign, with a dedicated Child Protection Month that is commemorated annually with participation from government and non-governmental organizations, religious and traditional leaders. Radio talk shows and other media platforms are utilized to reach children, parents, caregivers, and communities communicating in their respective languages. And then the Department of Social Development has embarked on skills development initiatives to empower girls, families, and communities through sustainable livelihood programs and cooperatives to reduce poverty in communities, which often sees a girl child being traded for financial rewards. The department, together with civil society organizations, provide the required services and interventions, psychosocial counseling, support, care, and protection. Responsibilities in services to children. The department and civil society organization are responsible to provide appropriate services to children who are at risk of or victims of child marriages. The first thing is we have to assess the circumstances of the child and establish risk factors related to the situation by using the broad risk assessment in the regulations and also the safety risk assessment tool. Investigation in terms of the circumstances of the child Then here we also have 2 levels of investigation. Remember, if you report it to SAPS, you'll have the SAPS doing the criminal investigation, but you as a social service practitioner will do an investigation in terms of the circumstances of the child. And then you refer the child for appropriate services to SAPS for a criminal case to be actually opened. The Department of Health, if the child for the child to have medicals done. Also, the Department of Home Affairs, if it's a foreign child, and then also to assist the child with travel documents back home and whatever, if you are able to establish where the child is from. Then also report to SAPS and complete Form 22 and report to the Child Protection Register. If the child is identified as a child in need of care and protection, prepare the child for the statutory process in placing the child in alternative care. Provision of trauma counseling, and colleagues, this is also another gap that we need to look at in terms of trauma debriefing, trauma counseling, trauma management, trauma containment, following the necessary steps in all these processes. And that's very, very key, because sometimes, like the gentleman said, you have an adult now who was a victim of Ukuthwala. So maybe when she's relating her stories, she can become traumatized, and then she can break down. How do you contain her? Because remember, trauma debriefing will not assist her at this point in time because she's been through the process. So as a social service practitioner, how do you then break down the services in terms of trauma? Then the psychosocial support, therapeutic counseling, care and overall protection. Then you follow the process of rehabilitation, reunification if you're returning the child to his or her own community or families. Then also we need to look at a reintegration process. What steps do we follow in order to ensure that the child is reintegrated into that community? Whether the child is not stigmatized, is not traumatized, how do you establish that? And then if it's a foreign child, we must prepare for the repatriation services to assist the child to return to the place or country of origin. And also remember here, you have to work with the International Social Services, with the Department of Social Development, to actually liaise with the country of origin or the place of origin to investigate the circumstances of the family there. Why was the child then placed in this situation? Who transported the child? So it's a coordination between SAPS, Department of Home Affairs, Social Development, and you work as a team in order to undertake the repatriation process. Now here I want to emphasize also, if it's a foreign child and you have established that the child, for example, is from, say, Rwanda, and you got a positive report from the social services there that the child can be returned to the parents. Here it's very important, colleagues, to understand processes that will unfold in the repatriation process. The International Social Services will provide you with a circumstantial report on the family. You as a social worker here will then use that report to support your application for the repatriation process. The DG, social development, needs to be informed of the intention for repatriating the child to the country of origin or the place of origin. When the DG is satisfied that the child will be repatriated, but the child will not be at risk to be harmed or murdered, he will then approve that repatriation process. If the child's family cannot afford for the travel costs, then the DG of social development will be motivated by the social worker, outlining the family's financial circumstances. The DG of social development will then make the necessary arrangements for the travel costs to be borne by the Department of Social Development. then the DG of Home Affairs needs to be informed also for the travel documentation for the child to return to the country of origin. Then the DG of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation needs to be informed as well of this process that's going to be undertaken. So it's 3 DGs that need to be informed in terms of repatriating the child. I was horrified in some instances where social workers are, for example, let me use an example from KZN, and are driving to the Limpopo border and dropping the children off at the border to say now we repatriated the child. And we had a serious situation when children, remember a few years ago where children were trafficked to Northwest, and the social workers then took the children over Northwest, over Limpopo, and then dropped them off at the border. And they used International Organization of Migration to assist them as well. And for those that flew back to, I can't get the name that the country that they were, Malawi. So now the DGs, there's a parliamentary question. The parliamentarians, especially in the opposition, want to know, what did the Minister of Social Development do with the repatriation process of those children? We have no records because we do not do that repatriation. So colleagues, be very guarded about this. Don't do things on your own accord, or don't do things that are convenient for you. Do things legally, follow what the legislation is saying and what processes we need to follow. Any questions at this point in time? Are we together?
Just in terms of a time check, we have 3 minutes to 11:30. I'm hoping that everybody, it looks like we might most likely need a few more minutes for those of you who have joined, if you have that time.
The
Just
other thing
bear
is,
with us.
Anissa,
Yes.
Anissa, the other thing is that we have 93 persons in the meeting now. Okay? Am I correct?
Yes, that's good. The attendance has been good. Thanks.
Yeah. So, but sometimes people are sharing computers.
Yes.
So, right? So, a
Yes.
way to actually get a proper data on the persons that attended this is for them to actually write their names in the chat box. So if you
So
found,
we
for
have-
example,
We
sorry,
have asked, sorry, Guy, at the beginning, and a couple of times I did mention that people need to click on the registration link, and if they're sharing devices, they need to do that as well.
yeah. So let's hope they are. Okay. So now we're moving on to, we're done with legislation. We're done with government's response. Now I want to emphasize the issue of linkages on elements of child exploitation. A victim of Ukuthwala needs to be recognized as a child who is exploited, as a child would also ultimately be a victim of the following. Remember earlier we discussed the issue of child labor. I see Martin had also put up something about the Department of Labor. Now, let me just explain a little bit about that. The Department of Labor also has a booklet on acceptable household chores. And that outlines at what age a child can do certain household duties. Like, for example, you can't expect a 4-year-old to cook rice or to cook pap. So it gives you an outline of the age that a child can actually do certain things within a home environment. So colleagues, if you have the documents that I developed, the programs for exploited children, which then in addition to that, I developed a social worker's guide and a brochure for child exploitation. In that brochure, the guidelines for acceptable household chores are included in the brochure for child exploitation. So if you have a copy of that, please read it and understand it, because we work closely with the Department of Employment and Labor, and we also responsible for the child labor program of action. We have responsibilities there, and we must report on a quarterly basis. One of the issues that DSD must report on is on the issues of child marriages. So as I said to you, when you provide your inputs to the child protection register, then we can pick up from there how many children were victims of child labor, how many children were victims of child marriages, how many children were victims of trafficking. So your reporting is very, very important, colleagues. Okay. Right. So it's child labor. We covered that. If a child is a victim of child marriages, then that child will be doing things that is beyond her age, sexual exploitation, then harmful cultural practices, then also the issue of child trafficking. So those are the elements that are linked to each other with Ukuthwala. Okay, and in conclusion, I'm on time, Anissa. Every child's basic needs are to be met to ensure the well-being of the child. It's our responsibility to ensure that awareness campaigns target children, parents, and communities on their care, safety, and protection in all aspects of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And intersectoral collaboration is key in addressing all levels of crimes against children. There's one thing I forgot to add onto my presentation slide is the helplines. You can write it down. So we know Childline is 116. The gender-based violence command center is 0800 428 428. Then we have the Films and Publication Board number if the child is a victim of online recruitment and through social media, and is also the details of the child is put on in the online space, even the sexual exploitation, and that is 0800 148 148. And then, of course, your SAPS number 10 111. Okay, so I've come to the end of my presentation. Anissa, I hope I've met your
Thank you.
the criteria that you wanted.
And I think it was very, very informative. I think it was a bit overwhelming. There's lots of information that colleagues can use. I see a hand by Vanessa. I also see a suggestion for virginity testing as a topic for a webinar, which is a good thing. We can always build on our topic base. And then also someone requested a share of the Department of Labor's guidelines on acceptable household chores. And I think you mentioned an important point around age-appropriate chores. I see another hand. So if everyone can just bear with us, Vanessa, and then I see a hand from, I'm not sure the name of the person, but from the National Freedom Network. So Vanessa, you can ask your question. If Gayan, if you'll indulge us just for a few minutes before we log off.
Thank you
No,
so
it's
much.
fine, Anissa. We can actually go on, and we can even we can have comments from the people in terms of the workshop, and so we can just maybe give another 10 minutes if it's okay with you. We can have comments, and then we can also have questions as well.
Vanessa?
Thank you so much. First of all, my comment is thank you, Gian, for this very, very informative, and I always like the refresher courses because your presentations technical parts of the legislation, but also for those of us working in the community, it gives a lot of context on what we can expect from government departments, but also thank you so much because you cross-pollinated and overlapped the legislation, which is brilliant. My question is, the handbook that you spoke about in terms of social workers having these kind of what we call a guide, because the challenge we have in the community, and I want to be very open here, is that many are not aware that I know you said on Form 22 we can put other, but other sometimes is just ticked but no details. And we need a specific details on that form because when we take it to SAPS, we're having a challenge that we are not able to prosecute when it comes to Ukuthwala because they don't know the overlapping of the different legislations. We also have a challenge again at the charge office because if you speak Ukuthwala, sometimes they don't even know what we are talking about. So I don't know whether those linkages can be made. I know these are gaps in the system, and we've been talking about this for many years, but can those handbooks be not just an optional um, resource for social workers, but a mandatory one? Thank you.
Okay. Do you want me to respond now, Anissa?
I think yes, you can respond, and then we'll move on to the next question,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Thank
I see
you.
people asking for those documents, but please note you cannot you can have documents, but you need to understand the premise of those documents. So it will be important for people to have training done and then understand how you utilize those documents in terms of the guidelines, in terms of the brochure, in terms of all the responsibilities of social workers, because there's linkages in terms of if you have a child that is trafficked, you will do ABCD. Because I also developed SOPs on quick responses to children who have been trafficked, children that are victims of online violations, online safety. So you can have the document, but how do you use it if you don't understand where it's coming from, what you need to do, how do you need to do it, what is the purpose of these documents? In terms of the guidelines for acceptable household chores, reach out to your Department of Employment and Labor, and they have tons of those documents. It's their document, but DSD did provide inputs to it. So reach out to them and ask them for copies, and then you distribute and keep a copy for yourself, which gives you actually a breakdown of, in terms of ages, what is age appropriate for a child to do. Okay, so I hope I've answered you, Vanessa. We can go on, Anissa.
Yes, and then we have a question from National Freedom Network.
Yeah.
Hi, Guy, and it's Renee Hanupum from the National Freedom Network. Thanks so much for a very informative session. I just wanted to kind of remind everyone that there are task teams within each province that specifically focuses on human trafficking. And there's also the National Intersectoral Committee that can be reported to. So where there are challenges with cases of Ukuthwala, at a station level, these cases can be escalated to your nodal points in your province. So I think it's important to also just make sure that everyone is aware of those task teams and that it's important for them to be aware of these cases, especially where a case of Ukuthwala overlaps with, child trafficking. and the National Human Trafficking Hotline can also be contacted, and their number is 0800 222 777. This is also a great resource for everyone, where they can get guidance on how to move forward with cases, and they can actually also report to these nodal points to make sure that cases are escalated and that the right procedures are followed. So I just wanted to provide that input. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much for that. But I just also want to advertise your services as um, in terms of the hotline. You also have language interpretation services available in the hotline. So I know that was something that Katie had always advocated for at the National Integrated Committee on Trafficking in Persons, the NICTIP, which is chaired by the Department of Justice. Okay, let's go on.
I don't see any more questions. I don't know if
I see
anyone
something's
wants.
popped up in the chat box, but I couldn't keep a track of it.
Okay, so I have had a look at the chat box. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else. Just the registration link again. Does it mean for parents or minor who learns about marriage when they have reached the age of 18? What can they do to dissolve? Okay, I think we have. Can you please? Okay. There is one question, but I think you did look at that. What does it mean for parents or minor who learns about marriage when they have reached the age of 18? What can they do to dissolve the marriage?
When they reach the age of 18, what can they do to dissolve the marriage? Is that the question?
Yes, Karen.
Okay. So if they reach the age of 18, I covered the aspects in terms of the marriage, the Customary Marriages Act. They can actually make an application to the Department of Justice to have the marriage dissolved. It's like how you would go through a divorce process, but you can do this application to the Department of Justice to have the marriage dissolved. Okay, so if a person cannot afford legal fees, then they utilize legal aid for that. Have I answered the person? Any comments from anybody thus far? Verbal comments besides writing in the chat box? Anybody could unmute and make a comment. Anissa, if it's okay with you. What impact did this training have on you?
I think just
Yeah.
it's almost 11:45.
Yeah.
I think I can allow for 5 minutes and then
Yeah, we
got
closed
another
then, yeah.
meeting. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, colleagues, anybody could unmute and please, because Anissa has put and Melanie and the team have put in a lot of effort to have this webinar. So please, if you could make a comment, a verbal comment, just unmute or raise your hand, and Anissa will inform me who it is. Colleagues, please, we're all social service practitioners. Come, let's talk very quickly, because I've got to go into the workshop now and do a presentation there.
Okay, so
on
Karen,
online.
it's fine if people are not comfortable
There's
or
two
don't
hands.
have anything. There are two hands. There's Vanessa and there's Joan.
And then there's
And
Guguletu.
Guguletu. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Vanessa, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for organizing this training. I do believe that this is a very short time for this training. Gyan is someone who's I've known for some time, even more resourceful than this. I know that she just went through this as a general overview, and it's a lot of information. I want to make a suggestion that this I know that we are used to the online space, but however we can do this, I think a face-to-face training will be the most impactful. Sometimes the attention levels on an online space is not as effective as if we would have had a face-to-face. But thank you so much for organizing this training. It's much needed, and I think that we need to repeat this often. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that, Vanessa. Just to clarify, so we do monthly webinars. So it's actually not a training. It was meant to be a webinar, but we happy with the suggestion, and should an opportunity be created, or we could possibly look at that going forward. Thank you. Nea, Nea Joan, right? If I pronounce it correctly, or Nadi
Yes,
Joan?
Joan. Uh, Good morning, colleagues. I said that Vanessa, yeah, she took almost all the things that I wanted to say that thank you very much for this monthly webinars that we are seeing the invitation. So it also helps to capacitate ourselves so that when we assist the community, we know very well what is it that we're saying and how to say it. And then remember, our legislation now and then it's amended, and then also it also assists on what is it that we can do. And then by virtue seeing the chat wherein everybody is introducing themselves, we end up taking the numbers for referral issues, for networking. So thank you very much for the webinars and also the interaction. I love it, and I've learned so much today on this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Bobby. We appreciate the positive comments. And then, Joan, Gugu, your turn.
Yes, thank you, Anessa. Thank you, Gawanthi. It was very informative and you are very passionate. So it was very nice to experience that. So we are lawyers, social worker, and therapists working in this space. So that was very interesting because this is not just for us another training. We live this every day. We have to represent clients and in courts around these issues of sexual abuse and the cases that go. So we are interested in training, especially you mentioned that yes, we can have all these resources available, but to link because it's often what we have to do. Sometimes some of the information was very new or I didn't know how to link. So it could be very useful. So I'm just wondering of the possibility, how do we attend? Where do we attend? How do you go about doing it?
Anissa.
Sorry, Gugu, you're inquiring about our programs and our webinars.
Yes, did you hear what I said? My computer, I think sometimes it freezes.
Yeah, I think you said, how do you go about
Yes,
how
we
do
work.
we go about getting information? So as you attend our programs and then we've put it on, otherwise alternatively, because we're in the gender-based violence space, a lot of we an umbrella body for gender-based violence shelters. So we put it out to all our shelters, our affiliated shelters, and then I think it's word of mouth and people who've attended previous webinars or trainings, we usually send information out to them as well.
Okay, yes, we are interested because we are lawyers and we work in the
Okay.
legal criminal so we are interested in receiving such.
Okay, yes. So you have attended, so we do have your email address, am I right? Have you registered on our
Yes.
link?
Yes, I have.
Okay. All right. So we should have your details as well. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
that. That's really important for us to know. Okay, so I see Renee, do you have another comment, Renee?
Yes, I just wanted to comment that the participants are also welcome to go onto the National Freedom Network website, where you can become members and also join our online webinars where we cover these type of topics. So please join us as well. We also will share our webinars that are upcoming with Anissa and she can disseminate the information to you. So we're always, twice a month covering topics related to human trafficking. And we invite people like Guyan to come and speak at those webinars. So I think that might be helpful for the participants as well.
Thanks for that, Renee. Renee, also thank you for being a link to Guyan and putting us in touch with her and to the National Freedom Network for the collaboration, even for our previous webinar that you did on human trafficking. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for engaging. Thank you to Guyan as well, and everybody for taking the time to spend their morning with us. And we look forward to you joining our webinars going forward. And I wish you all a great afternoon. Take care.
Okay. Thank you and bye.
Bye.